Okay, so first we get the URL from the GitHub repo, and we use that to clone the project into a new Visual Studio solution. Once we have that, go into Properties, Settings, and you'll notice two entries, clay and passphrase. Passphrase is like the SSRS API key, and clay or key is the encryption key used to encrypt external clients to SSRS. Also note there are build events which copy the extRSAuth DLL to the appropriate SSRS folders so that the custom auth can be used in Report Manager and Report Server. We're going to go ahead here and install SQL Server reporting services, most current version. Once that's installed, we set up the database. It's going to create the report server and report server temp databases. And once that is finished, we can go ahead and create the web server URL and the web portal URL. You'll want to select, if you're setting it up for localhost, you'll want to set it up with a localhost certificate. If this is for a named server that's externally facing, you'll use your SSL certificate with your externally facing domain name. Here we're just using the Visual Studio IIS certificate. You'll want to go in and change the validation and the machine keys. By default, these are set to some static values, but you'll want to use your own values, obviously, for security reasons. So here we're just demonstrating that we can change them. Additionally, we're going to slightly change the encryption key or clay setting and the passphrase API key setting. Now that we've changed all of those, we're going to build the project, which will copy the DLLs to the appropriate places in the SSRS installation. Next, we're going to copy the path of our extRSAuth project and change directory into that path so that we can then copy the initialization script and run it in PowerShell. This will dynamically make all of the necessary additions and entries and changes in all of the configuration files in order to enable custom authentication with the extRSAuth method or the extRSAuth assembly. Now that we have it set up, you can see our default user, extRSAuth, doesn't have access to anything by default. So what we need to do here is stop the SSRS service, and there's an option for no auth, which should only ever be set to true if you're trying to do things and not have to worry about security. So here we set that variable to true, restart the SSRS service, and you'll see that now the extRSAuth user has full access to everything any user would when that variable is set to true. So here we're going to go in and assign extRSAuth as a system administrator. And then additionally, we're going to want to give them top-level permissions to all of the SSRS folder structure. So we go ahead and add extRSAuth to the top level of the SSRS site. And that's it. Now the extRSAuth user has the ability to create other users, and create permissions for those users, who can then go on to create presumably other users and create granular permissions as needed. Now that we have that set up, we go back in and recompile with that variable turned to false, with no auth set to false, in order to have things actually operating on security again. Next, we need to go in and create an extRSAuth user in the database. Note this step is not necessarily required, but it is if you want to use a shared data source. The shared data source needs to point to some user, and it cannot be a Windows user because we're not using Windows Auth. So here we create an extRSAuth database user. We're then going to set our localhost shared data source to this user, save it, and then initially you'll notice that doesn't work. The reason that doesn't work is because the user was just created. So the user needs to change their password upon their first connection. So we're going to go ahead and slightly update their password. We'll add an exclamation point. Now that we've done that, we can go back, update the data source credentials by adding that exclamation point to the password, which is the new password. And as you'll see, we can see our report now in design view within Visual Studio. Now that we have that, we can deploy our first set of stuff using extRSAuth. As you'll see, we get prompted for a username and a password. Username should be extRSAuth, the user we created, the SSRS user we created. Password is the API key. Again, the passphrase setting in the extRSAuth project. Once we've deployed that, we can now see that in our report portal. If we navigate to the report we just deployed, it runs locally, and all of this being achieved without any Windows security. No Active Directory checks involved. Just to confirm that we are running this in SQL Server 2025, we can check that through OSQL command line utility. And we can also confirm this is the most recent version of SSRS as of June 20th, 2025. If we run the tests, we're going to see a couple of them fail. Reason being is the password needs to be updated with that extra exclamation point we added. The API key, I should say, or passphrase in the extRSAuth project. Once we've updated that, we'll see that all the tests pass. And you can go in and look at some of those tests. I try to do a good job of describing how the custom security works and how various things operate within the context of this. If we go into the extras solution, which is a different repo, but closely related. I'm going to produce a different video demonstrating how that works with extRSAuth. If we go there, we see that all the tests fail. This is because the extras passphrase and clay secrets were not updated to contain those changed values. Once we change them, rerun the tests, and we can see that everything passes successfully. That demonstrates that a client is able to consume SSRS API operations successfully using extRSAuth custom security. And the way things work is that if it's a local connection, everything will just work by default. If it is not a local connection and the client is remote, then the request needs to come in the form of a URL with an encrypted query string, which is then decrypted by the report server custom security. And if the external client used the correct encryption key and things are encrypted properly, it will properly decrypt on the report server side, and the external client will have access. So it's all based on the encryption key on this machine. If we go back, we can toggle auth back to extRSAuth, custom security, and everything works. It stops and restarts the service as part of both the installation and the toggle auth script, PowerShell script. If you want, you can also upload a brand package, which is just a zipped couple of files, the main file being a style sheet file, which determines the colors and fonts of various areas of SSRS. Here we didn't customize too many things, but for instance changed the banner to green and changed a couple other UI areas. And lastly, we're just going to demonstrate that we are able to, with extRSAuth custom security, we're able to access the SSRS API here locally. It can also be accessed remotely though, with our extRSAuth custom security. What we're going to do is create a session. As you can see, every time you create a new session, you get a new cookie. That value is changing, the SQL auth cookie. And once a session is created, we can then run any of the operations we have access to, which in this case is pretty much everything. So as you can see, it's showing the reporting services catalog items that we have deployed to our report server. It also should be noted again, because we kind of glossed over it at the 12-minute, 18-second mark, you'll want to make sure you set your username and passphrase variable when connecting to the API, as well as the URL of the SSRS API you're trying to connect to. With those three pieces of information, you will be able to authenticate, create a session, and use the SSRS API with extras custom auth. If you have any questions on how any of this works, please feel free to leave a comment or reach out to me through GitHub or my email. Thanks.